Cedra Jones, and I was the chair this year for the African American History Month Planning Committee. I first want to thank everybody who's involved between the City of St. Paul and Ramsey County for being involved with this committee. I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing our MC today, Commissioner JaPaul Harris. Commissioner Harris is a commissioner with the Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity Department's HERO Commission. In 2010, Mayor Coleman appointed him as the chair of this commission. He is an active member in the legal community, including the Ramsey County Bar Association, Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, and Minnesota State Bar Association. Previously, Commissioner Harris worked as the supervising attorney of the Senior Law Project at the Legal Aid Society of Minneapolis, at the Minneapolis Public School District, and as a staff attorney at Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, Inc., in its Housing Equity Law Project. He lives in St. Paul's North End neighborhood, where he is also known for coaching youth football at Jimmy Lee Recreation Center in St. Paul. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Harris.
Good morning, everyone. And what she didn't tell you is I'm also a referee in Hennepin County. I hear housing court matters. So why I was late was because, as many of you probably know, lawyers have a tendency not to shut up when they need to. So that's what occurred. Thank you for having me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panel. It's quite a distinguished panel, and I kind of am surprised they would want me to introduce them because these are all giants and all very good to be here today. So the first person is Jean, and I always mispronounce your name, Jean, because I just do that. So what's it again?
Gelgelu.
Gelgelu. So I did it again. He is on the commission with me, actually. He's one of the commissioners. In addition to being on the commission, he is also on the State of Minnesota Governor's Council on the Martin Luther King Day celebration. He was born in Ethiopia and founded the African Economic Development Solution in St. Paul right after he received his master's degree in finance from St. Mary's University. He is the executive director of this organization. He has lived in St. Paul for 10 years. We also have Dr. Josie Johnson, and we all know Dr. Josie Johnson. If you don't, I'm surprised. You should. She is a trailblazer here in Minnesota. Dr. Johnson is, she helped found the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and she was the director of the Minneapolis Urban League, a professor of education and public policy at the University of Minnesota, as well as she was a principal at St. Peter Claver Catholic Elementary School. She has been a recipient of many awards, one this year, I believe, at the Martin Luther King celebration in downtown Minneapolis for all of her, I would say years, but it's more decades of work in the civil rights area. So it is a pleasure to have Dr. Josie Johnson on the panel. And then we have Yusef Mgeni. Mr. Mgeni has spent more than 35 years in leadership positions in the community and community-based organizations. He has contributed many years as a board member, and he has also been on he's been on many national civil and professional organizations. Mr. Mgeni was raised in the Rondo neighborhood here in St. Paul and is a lifelong community member here in St. Paul. How we're going to run this today is I'm going to ask some questions of the panel, and we're going to go in order with Jean first, Dr. Johnson, and then Mr. Mgeni. I'll ask a second question, and we'll get some questions, some answers. After that, if we have some time, I'm going to open it up to you to ask some questions, and then after that, we are going to introduce our speaker, Mahmoud El-Kati, and I will introduce him later, and he will give our speech. So the first question, and I'll start with you, Jean, is what aspect of your culture are unique because of the experience you've had in the Twin Cities, and compare how your cultural experience may be different in another metropolitan area, city, or state?
Good morning. My culture started where I came from. My culture started with my origin, where I came from. I'm first generation African American. I have black heritage. I'm always, the culture we grow up, dictate who we are. And And of course, I get to learn the culture I'm in, and more I'm influenced by my culture, which is include, food we eat is in one of our culture, language, and the religion we follow, and those are the distinctive factors that make me unique. Not necessarily I'm unique, but make me distinct to know who I am and as a human being, and relate to others who look like me, who I associate myself with.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me. When I think about my culture and whether it is influenced by where I am influenced by the fact that Black African Americans have a particular set of experiences that represent us all. So that the culture that I feel, my experience, my way of thinking, my way of interacting, my way of observing, my way of being critical is a result of that experience from my ancestors, having been fortunate enough to know my great-grandfather, grandfather, father, mother, brothers and sisters, and the community that really raised me. I don't think I realized until the question was put whether there would be a difference depending on where I am. And perhaps that's because we, as African Americans, have such a common set of experiences, from the way we're treated, the way we are viewed, the way we react to our environment, that I never noticed. And I'm not sure, so I'm going to pay closer attention to that to see if Minnesota treated me differently, and therefore I responded differently, or different sets of my culture was exposed as a result of that. But in my judgment, there are very few differences that I can identify among us as a people from one community to another, because we've all been trained universally in America about our culture, our experience, and America's reaction to us is rather universal. So I don't think I've noticed the difference. And I thank you for the question, because now it's another piece of research.
Mr. Mgeni.
Thank you very much for the invitation to spend a few minutes with you today. Culture is anything that is learned and shared among a given group of people that travels across generations. And as such, my generation grew up east of Dale Street on Rondo, which was then known as Cornbread or Cornmeal Valley. And everything west of Dale Street was Oatmeal Hill. And because St. Paul was a very segregated community, there was, in effect, a protective bubble around those of us who grew up in the Rondo neighborhood. The extended family concept, the music, the religion, the neighbors, the occupations, the black men who worked either on the railroad or at the packing house. There were a few at the post office. There were limited opportunities for African American males, and many African American females were domestics, or there were a handful of teachers, secretaries, or others in the service industry. That culture was rich, it was varied and diverse. I mentioned that it was protective. It was all-encompassing. You couldn't go a half block or a half mile from where you lived and cut up, because somebody's grandmother would stick her head out the window and say, "Boy, if you don't watch yourself, I'm coming out there and whoop your behind. And I'm calling, I know who you are, you're one of them bad Anderson boys. I'm calling your mother and your grandmother, and you're going to get another whooping when you grow home." So there was a real close-knit sense of community, and although the African American community was a small one here in St. Paul, it was indeed very organized, and there was a great deal of unity. How that may have differed had I grown up in another metropolitan area would be based on music, would be based on the diet, would be based on the customs, the athletics, the particular cultural activities that were more in evidence in that particular locale than they were in ours. But, you know, Joe Lewis came to St. Paul, Paul Robeson came to St. Paul, Daniel Hale Williams came to St. Paul. Our families were very actively involved in civil rights organizations, and went to an African American Catholic school, had black nuns who got paid $1 a week plus room and board because education was their mission. And so in the second or third grade, we were reading Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro. We were reading J.A. Rogers. We were reading Richard Wright. So I can't imagine a richer cultural environment than the one that I was blessed to grow up in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, as I got older, when Jesse Ventura became our governor and Michelle Bachmann became our representative for the 6th Congressional District, if I were traveling, people would ask me where I was from, and I would say, the Midwest. And if they pressed me, I would say, the Upper Midwest. Because I didn't want to have to explain or assume any responsibility for some of the political, cultural decisions that were made by members in this region. And again, thank you very much for the invitation.
So are you still from the Midwest, or are you now from Minnesota?
Upper Midwest.
Midwest. All right, the next question I have is, what opportunities have presented themselves with Diaspora? How has that influenced your culture, your sense of blackness, your sense for community with other African heritage people? I will start with you, Mr. Mgeni.
Thank you. Let me try and give 4 very brief examples. And I never learned how to talk fast, so I will try to be brief. 117 years ago, W.B. Du Bois said that the American Negro faced an ideological paradox. An ideology is a political philosophy with an action plan, and a paradox is something that is but ain't, like a mercy killing, you know, no such thing. And he pointed out that the American Negro has within one dark body 2 warring ideals, both an American and a Negro, yet never fully allowed to develop either. He would also point out that the primary problem of the 20th century would be the problem of the color line or the race issue. Take it one step further. Richard Wright said that life is dedicated to the lonely outsiders who exist precariously on the cliff-like margins of many cultures. Men and women who are maligned and criticized by Christian and pagan and left and right, and who carry on their frail but indefatigable shoulders a search for a home for their hearts, a home which, if found, could be a home for the hearts of all men. Richard Wright also said that we're in America, but not of it, okay? And Professor Mahmoud El-Kati says, and Louis Leakey, the anthropologist who discovered African bones and African stones that were 4.5, 5 million years old, says, we're all African people, more or less. Now, I agree with Dr. and Professor Ron Karenga, who said that race is 3 things: color, culture, and consciousness. So taking that into account within the diaspora, the influence on African Americans in this community was not, as Dr. Johnson pointed out, significantly different from that of other people. My grandmother used to say, boy, if you're black, everything south of the North Pole is south. So don't get confused about this down south, up north business, okay? And I think if you agree that race is color, culture, and consciousness, that we all inherit and have a responsibility to practice those, okay? With commitment, with dignity, with our back straight, And when I was a kid, they used to say, when you grow up, we want you to be a credit to the race. And I didn't know if they were talking about the Indianapolis 500 or the 100-yard dash. It was be a credit to the race, be a race man, you know. And as a youngster, 10, 12 years old, I just wanted to be accepted and respected and to make a contribution. But one of my favorite principles in the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles embodied in Kwanzaa, is kuumba. On its surface, it means creativity, but beneath the surface, it means that each of us has a responsibility to leave our community more beautiful than it was when we inherited it. And if one person would be willing to say that about me after I'm gone, then I will feel, as Frantz Fanon said, that each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. So, Dr. Johnson.
What do you say after that wonderful presentation? I'm sure there'll be many wonderful statements made about you, Yusef. I never question that. When I think about the diaspora, as far as we're concerned as a people, what I have to think about is how each group was trained to understand who we are. So as an African slave people, there was a very different set of teachings that went on in America about African Americans. We see that daily in our society even now. America has been taught that we are an inferior people, we are lazy people, we are not family people. Therefore, there has been this attitude developed about us in this part of America. Now, I'm not sure that there can be a very significant difference once we get to know our brothers and sisters from other parts of the world and know that we all are Africans and we were sent in different places but treated differently. I think that once we are in this place, in the US of A, that has been taught differently about us, there becomes a different set of observations you make, a different set of understanding how my brother from Ethiopia might be seen relative to how my brother from Upper West, Midwest is seen. And part of it is because we in America have been taught uniformly about us. So the diaspora may be reflective of that environment, that group, that teaching. But here in America, there is the reflection of who we are as it has been designed. Now, what I know, what I think I know, is that the influence of that early teaching impacts not only how we see ourselves and the kind of struggle we have to design, but it also affects how people instinctively see us. And it doesn't seem to matter. That's what's been such a sad experience for this old lady. It doesn't seem to matter where we are or who we are. If you look at how the teaching of America has been reflected on the most powerful person in the world who happens to be of a particular diaspora. So that it teaches us, don't you think, that that training has been so carefully taught that it is very difficult for people to say, well, my daughter died in Ethiopia in '89, over there with a congressman looking at the condition of mothers and girls. So Ethiopia is precious to me. But I know that our brothers and sisters from Ethiopia, that part of the diaspora, to America, had a very different sense of who they were and how they are perceived by this country. So what I guess I'm trying to say is that the influence of our culture, having grown up in an environment in which we all fought hard every day for the right to vote, to get the kind of justice. My mother didn't rest until my brothers got home at night. That's way back in the 40s, my friends. She couldn't rest until they were home, cars parked, and in the house. So the culture is constantly influenced. Maybe not the culture influenced, but our behavior and reaction to it is influenced by our experience. So the diaspora can be defined, and we can remember that we all are Africans who were sent to different parts of the world. And that diaspora and our treatment depended on what part of the world we were sent to and how we saw ourselves and it. So I'm looking, once again, constantly searching for other ways that we can talk about this that is inclusive, honest, and direct.
It's hard to talk after Dr. Josie, but my 2 cents. Culture and diaspora is conflicting with where I grow up. The main reason is, we grew up in a culture where structured is a norm to behave certain way. If not acceptable in society. Just one example. When we grow up, I sit down, I cannot let my elder to stand. That's a norm. You get cursed if you sit down, your elder stand. So another example, when I grew up, to shake with 2 hands is a respect. And someone in higher authority or older than you. So when I came here, the main reason I was saying the conflicting, when I came here, I was doing exactly the same. My boss, my old boss, I think over 10 years, 15 years ago, oh, Gene, she said, I know you are a very, very honest guy. I know you are hardworking. That's why we promote you to leadership. But if you can see someone and you are not telling the truth. What? It's conflicting because I was raised to respect. I bow down when she come. I bow down and say hi with 2 hands. It's a way of us to give respect for higher authority and someone who's older than me. So it was a turning point for me. It was a turning point for me. There's no way I would continue to do the same thing until that day I was told that is not the norm in here, right? So she gave me the opportunity to assess my culture. And because, you raised in that structured culture, I still struggle to look at someone I live with it. My kid who is from here, he doesn't have that struggle. And already told me I'm from here. I'm American. So I claim I'm a both, not one. Culture is more than the language. Just when I go back to in Ethiopia, I'm Oromo. And the name, we name our kids, identify who we are. The name, I'm not really Gene, if you, I'm not, I'm American Gene. The main reason the Mgeni is, my name is spelled Genene, is Ganana. Not Gene, it was Janine. They always call me Janine because it's a female name. So, so it's Janine. So I had to discount it in half. Gene is good enough to call me. So my friend, nobody can call my last name either. Because it's culture. I can't say it either. So, because our vocal is trained that way, there's nothing wrong not saying. It's not about rudeness or it's not about anything, but it's about our vocal natural, that's how we are trained. There's a certain name, I cannot say it. I rather be polite than saying you offend someone. But, the culture that I grew up, that's the culture. But I have to adapt to the new culture also. Remember, in Ethiopia, when I grew up, I never had foreign influence. That's another, the difference between any ethnic group is all 99%, 100% is black Ethiopians. So you don't see that the difference people called by ethnic group, by race. So that's after I came here, so the new norm I learned is there's district that relate me to African American community, that's family, and the more I had opportunity to be serve in a board that primarily serve Rando community. So I was telling someone yesterday about Rando, and they say, "Oh, you don't even know Ethiopian history. How you know about Rwanda?" So it's this is my home. This is where we live. And the culture also evolved. The culture I know, almost close to 20 years ago, is not the same in Ethiopia. Right. It's evolved because created by people, by generation. So, I had that package of when I came, that's what I know. I even see the food, how we eat, and but that norm is not in 100% change, but that's not the norm that in there either. So I was blessed to have a friend from diverse community also to get opportunity to learn what make me as human being distinct and also similar what I share with others. That I would share.
Thank you all. I know I can hog up all of this wisdom and knowledge, but I think I'm not going to do it. I'm going to open it up to you folks now. We do have time for a couple of questions. Any questions from the audience? In the back.
Yes, to the statement that the gentleman just made in regards to culture evolving, and that's something that's created by the people. My question would be, and maybe either one of you on the board on the panel can answer it. And looking at in Black history, there's been plenty much involvement with other cultures, but one thing remains a constant, and that's African Americans or American African Americans are always considered to be inferior to other cultures in all areas, economical, societal, financial, or whatever. And our culture continuously strive to do better, to be better, to push harder, to teach our kids more. But we continuously and constantly get stereotyped into this mold that we're inferior. That's a struggle that has been going on since our forefathers were forcefully brought into this country. So how do we, as an African American people, continue to battle this constant in a productive way? Because it appears that we'd never be accepted as equal by society's norms.
How much time do we have?
We have a few minutes. We're unfortunately going to have to try to cut it as close as possible. So what I'm going to do is, Mr. Mgeni, I think I'm going to throw that question directly to you because I think
Okay.
we only have time for one person to answer it. So go ahead.
I appreciate your question. James Baldwin referred to the concept you're acknowledging as the price of the ticket. And he said that every group that immigrated to this country as part of the price for full acceptance to American citizenship had to subscribe to the myth of inferiority for black people. Let me just tell you a brief story. My birth certificate says I'm colored. My baptismal certificate says I'm a Negro, okay? My diploma from St. Peter Claver Parochial School says I'm black. My high school diploma says I'm Afro-American. My first degree says I'm African American. It has been with and without a hyphen. And I was 42 years old in Salzburg, Austria. And I went through customs, which was in a railroad station. And there was a young Austrian kid, 18 years old, with a machine gun, standing guard at his country's border. And he was shouting, "American, halt, American, Stein." And like everyone else in the train station, I was wondering who in the world they were hollering at, okay? And I walked about a block from customs when somebody tapped me on the shoulder and I turned around. And it was this young 18-year-old kid in uniform with the rifle. I didn't know who they were hollering at because I had never been referred to as an American in my life. And I was 42 years old. So I thought it would be a teachable moment. We have to be, as African people, better than average in order to get average recognition. We have to be the best at what we do to be considered above average, okay? And we have to be at peace with ourselves to appreciate and respect the struggle that we have to not only participate in, but lead for our own self-determination and for the pride and respect of our communities. One of the ways we do that is through history, because the Negro poet Saunders Redding, in The Negro Writer and His Roots, said, "A people's relationship to their history is the same as the relationship of a child to its mother. History is how a people tell their time of day. It is a map that they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. And our history not only tells us where we've been and how we got to where we're at, but where we still must go and what we still must be and do, okay? And we have to embody that history with dignity, with pride. This is the 89th observance of Black or African American History Month, which started as Negro History Week, because white journals would not accept the contributions of African American historians and researchers about the contributions that Black and African people made, not to Black people, but to humanity, okay? And so we have to embody that through our social practice. We have to embody that in the upbringing of our children and in the conduct of our social practice in the community on a daily basis. And that is a struggle that I do not believe we will succeed in our lifetimes, but I think it's a continuum that began hundreds of years ago, and we have been given the baton and we have to carry it. So I'm less concerned about what other people think or feel about me in contrast to how I feel about myself and what kind of image or self-determination or pride and self-respect I can convey to other people who look like me and share that experience so they can continue to carry the baton into successive generations. And I hope that in some small way responds to your question.
And I see Dr. Johnson looks like she
All
wants to
I
say
want
something.
to
So
is
go
just
ahead.
piggyback here because Yusef has said it all. As a child growing up and as African American people in America, we were always told that you have to do more, be hard worker, you have to work harder, you have to do, so it's part of, and I keep saying, if those early people who enslaved our ancestors could teach that so well that it still exists in today's society, why can't we as teachers teach our children to read, write, think, be critical observers of our society? What is it that they were able to do so well that it still exists? Because your question, my dear, is one that's
Ever present.
ever present. Yeah, so thank you for asking.
And what I will tell you, Dr. Johnson, is that even though we're over time, I have the good sense to know that when you want to speak, you get to go ahead and say what you want to say. That is just fine.
Thank you very much. I hope I
Please
didn't
give just join me in just giving the panel a brief hand. It is also my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Mahmoud El-Kati. Professor El-Kati is a professor emeritus of history at Macalester College. The college has established the Mahmoud El-Kati Distinguished Lectureship in American Studies in recognition of his scholarly and community work. He is an honored elder, lecturer, writer, and commentator on the African American experience. He specializes in African American African American history and advocates institution building with cultural communities. He is an international expert on the diaspora of the African people and African American history and culture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mahmoud El-Kati.
You can sit here. We're good. You can sit here.
Let me just start with the panel. It was a very enriching discussion across the board on culture, which is what I think that people, American people, white, black, all shades in between, need to put on their agenda to try to understand that, because it's real. Race is not. It's false. That's already been proven. I mean, there's no biological reality to race, but it is a powerful myth that we believe in, because that's all we know. This is a race-ridden society. It was founded by white supremacists. Thomas Jefferson was a white supremacist. There was nothing wrong with that. That was normative. Whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, the blacks are inferior to the whites, both in the endowments of the mind and the body. And he went on and on describing all kinds of things about all the stereotypes in white people's head. Much of it comes from Thomas Jefferson, who was a quintessential white supremacist, meaning that he was a very intelligent man, which is where racism comes from, not Bubba in Georgia and Texas on the back of a pickup with a rifle on his side and a six-pack in front of him. That's a stereotype of the racist. The racists I'm arguing with are the intelligentsia, the people who run institutions, who created the idea in the 1600s in Europe. You never heard of the Comte de Gobineau and Houston Toole Chamberlain. They are the spiritual fathers of Adolf Hitler. It's a part of European culture, the notion when this thing exploded on the world and spread that idea all over the world. New things came into being. Negro. There were no Negroes until Columbus got lost. Yes, he did. Chris got lost, let's face it. There were no half-breeds in this land. There were no mulattoes. There were no quadroons. There were no octoroons. There were no mestizos. There were no zambos. All these ideas come from intellectual Europe. And these divisions, these categories that we define ourselves as come from one place and space. This is not an indictment. White people are human beings. I understand that. As black people or Chinese or anything, I'd like to think it was a mistake, as Jefferson later said, in effect, that I believe that slavery is an exercise of the most boisterous passions, of unremitting despotism on the one hand and degrading submissions on the other. It teaches white children to be tyrants after the pattern of their parents. It destroys the will to work in white men. And above all, it robs man of God's greatest gift, and that is the gift of liberty. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and that his justice cannot sleep forever. This is Thomas Jefferson. This is a caveat. This is like presaging the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. He understood the contradictions, that they were given by previous generations something in the middle of the Age of Enlightenment. Jefferson was a part of the new thought in the world with the Europeans, with the John Locke's and the people who were talking about slavery is archaic and the Industrial Revolution and the rise of science. He was a modern man in his thinking, but he was just what Yusef alluded to. He was a contradiction. That's what America is. It's a contradiction. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Dr. Martin Luther King claimed that's the greatest socio-political document ever in history. He said that. Jefferson inspired half the world about the dignity of human personality. And at the same time, he held over 600 black men and women and children in bondage, not all at once, but during his lifetime. George Washington had more than 400 slaves after he married Martha Custis, because her father left her almost 300 slaves. You understand? The man who wrote the Constitution, James Madison, who was a slave owner. And one of the things I agree with him about, he wrote that, and the Constitution's written like this, he said, the first law of politics is do not trust men with power. I'm down with that. I'm down with that, yeah. He's saying he was talking about power, not about race and that kind of stuff. He's already racist. Racism and racism. Race is a myth. Racism is a reality produced by the myth. Racism, until day before yesterday, was normative. It was normal for white people to be some degree of race. That's the price of the ticket. He already alluded to that. That you pay to be white. We got to stop this. All of us have to grow up. Nobody can prove that they're white. No one with any sense would dare try to prove that. It's nonsense. Complicated nonsense. And it's being unraveled, certainly by certain scholars and people with common sense. Nobody could, as inferior as I look, nobody can convince me that I'm inferior to anybody because of their color. I knew that when I was 9 years old, when I met white, I'm a Southerner, who couldn't read as well as I, who actually I thought were dummies. You're a kid because they couldn't read. But I could. They were white people. So nobody, and I'm not unusual. I know that. There's just some black people, you gotta get away from them with that inferior stuff. Because you can't convince them, no matter what you do and how you isolate and how you deprive them. They don't believe that because they've seen too many white people already. So that's nonsense. But I wanna do a hop, skip, and a jump. I'm gonna try to do a James Brown on you. And we'll hit it and quit it, you know. But the first thing I want to say is about culture. That's the most relevant question. 3 things make culture: the idea, the concept, a great idea. First of all, it's a universalism. Everybody has culture. All human beings are creatures of some culture. All individuals are creatures of culture. Right? There's no such thing as a culture-deprived human being. It may not be your culture. It may not look as good as your culture according to you, but it is a way of life. Those ways of lives which are learned, shared, and transmitted from one generation to another. Culture is anything that people make or do or think or know or feel. It's a poem. It's a hatchet. It's a rifle. It's a beautiful song. It's religion. It's habits. It's custom. It's everything material or intangible. Things that people make or do in different ways. What culture teaches you is that there's more than one way to be a human being. And that's the problem with white supremacy and what's happening to our children, which borders on criminality. Because the teacher doesn't know. She's been trained into an ideology, which is a system of ideas and beliefs and values which trains you in a way to see the world. Now, if I were talking about communism, everybody would understand that. Ideology, you're communist? Well, doggone it, we don't want any God in this place. We are atheists. And this is what you are going to be if you're a communist. That people are not born communists. Most people didn't carry communist cards in Soviet Union when it was together. No more than 20% of the people in the communist was communists. You know, really serious, tough, enduring communists. But it dominated the institutions of the society. So if people weren't communists, they genuflected to it. That's what whites do in America. I don't think anybody is born a racist. Racism wasn't born in America. It was brought here. But all of us are tainted by white supremacy. I'm tainted by it. That's why I struggle against it every day. I'm tainted by, I got a little Jefferson in me. Because that's the ideology of this country. And there was nothing wrong with being racist until the civil rights movement spoke truth to power. And we changed the vocabulary a little bit. Not much, but a little bit. You know? I mean, there was a time racism says you don't address beautiful, dignified, productive women like Josie Johnson as Miss or Mrs. Racism, call her gal. Gonna get real dirty, call her wench. I don't care how good looking she is. I don't care how much education she's got. That's what racism taught. This is what the Montgomery bus boycott was over that initially about respecting black women. The bus driver kept calling her Mrs. Parks and people like that out of their names. And black men did stand up. Said, no, you're not going to talk to my mama like that, my sister like that, my wife like that. That's the background. That's the backstory to the Montgomery bus boycott. Joanne Robinson, a professor at Alabama State University, had already organized the women's political caucus before Dr. King showed up. These were black women fighting for it. Look, the simple fact that treat me as a human being. Call me Miss or Mrs. or ma'am like you do white women. There was nothing wrong with that. That was the norm. See, that's racism at its best. I mean, it attacks the spirit. I think one of the most violent acts against African people, more than the lynchings and the church bombings and the castrations and the killings, is the assault against black people's mind. That's the real deal, because human beings are controlled by ideas, and ideas rule the world. If it's in your head, you're going to do it. And we don't have a counter-narrative, as they were alluding to, a counter-narrative. Like, for instance, I kept hearing the word diaspora. Now, I know Americans pretty good. This is going to sound arrogant. I think I know something about America. Some that most people don't know. But you kept using the word diaspora and so forth. We better be, because it goes right over America's head. There are two ways to look at these millions of people from Africa. The people in Africa who still live there, and the people who were taken from Africa, as somebody said, forcibly, brutally, worse than any animal ever taken out of Africa. Black people were taken out worse than any lion or cheetah or whatever, under worse conditions. The diaspora are the scattered millions with African roots. The scattered millions. And most of them are not in the United States of America. Most Africans went to South America. More than half of Brazil has African-descended people, and the other part is native people. There are very few Portuguese on the planet. It's a tiny country. There may be 10 or 12 million people in Portugal. You know, I mean, this is the biggest black population outside of Africa is in Brazil. And then Cuba, 51% of the people in Cuba would be African descended. I love Castro for this. You see, a communist. I don't care about that because Senator Bilbo called him a communist, and he's a racist. And the lowest animal on the planet is a white supremacist. To me, not to black people. That's another thing we got to stop doing. I said that. Mahmoud El-Kati's talking, not Josie, not him. You understand what I'm saying? Black people, you know, you make every black person a leader, and you say, oh, you heard that guy, Mahmoud. What do you think about that? You know, think what I think. He thinks what he thinks. He's not, he don't speak for me, but I have every right to speak, and I respect the First Amendment. That's what I'm practicing, not on behalf of black people, but on behalf of my own conscience is telling me to do this. I know we got to get out of here. This is a terrible thing here. Black History Month, for those of us who do this, is a part of our everyday life. You know, February becomes a big, big month. I mean, I don't know how many dates I got on my calendar. You know, and so those of us who do this as a cluster of black people who teach black history, we call this Negro Employment Month, you know. I don't have to worry about doing that. I'm busy and just all over the place, you know what I mean? But let me just leave with this. Thank you, and I know you got to go. Du Bois alluded to, he was brilliantly, Yusef talked about the double consciousness, this peculiar sensation of seeing yourselves through the eyes of others. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being asunder. One ever feels his two-ness. See, black people are asked to be two people, American and a Negro. You know what I mean? And we want to merge this double consciousness, Boy said, into a higher, truer self, beyond racism, beyond these categories, where a man can be a man, a woman, and a child, a child. Lastly, and I hope be everywhere, I hope who are these people who say, I want my country back? Who are these guys? Tea Party. I hope you're in this audience. Here's Du Bois' response to you. This is my country. Your country, how came it yours? Before the Pilgrims landed, we were here. Before the pen of Thomas Jefferson etched the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence across the face of history, we were here. It is here that we brought our three great gifts and mingled them with yours. The gift of song, of soft, stirring melodies, in an ill-harmonized and unmelodious land. The gift of sweat and brawn to beat back the wilderness, fell the forest, till the soil, and lay the foundations to this vast economic empire 200 years before your weak hands could have done it. And the third and greatest gift that we have is the gift of spirit. You can't shoot that. You can't stomp that. You can't hang that. You can't cut that. You can't castrate that. That's black people's greatest gift. The third gift, the bless my boys, Gary. His last album was the third gift. Anybody heard of the Sounds of Blackness? Very important institution. I didn't realize, over 40 years old, teaching people who black people are through music. Absolutely. They got the whole thing, as we say on the corner. You can understand America through black people's music better than a textbook can teach you. You study black music, every point of departure in music which changes public taste has come from the black community. I said every, that sounds arrogant. So I'm saying that, not Josie Johnson, so don't get on her. Yeah, you don't do that. I'm an individual. You're supposed to respect the individual, right? So don't put it on black people. See, that's stereotype. That's racism right there. I said that. If I were white, people would contest me as an individual who happen to be white. So you don't agree with me, I'm ready to roll with anybody, you know. Anybody. Okay, bring Bill Buckley or that big mouth guy, Bill, somebody who says a historian and he's not a historian. You know, Big Bill, he's always O'Reilly. Big mouth, that's what I mean. A big blowhard posing as a historian. He's no historian. And historians know that. And their white historians ought to shut him up. He's taking advantage of white people's willful ignorance. That's there too. Finally, this is for black people. White people too, but mainly for black people. You got to stand up. You got to stop this foolishness. Since nobody else got nerve enough to do it, you've got to do it. And the only way you're going to make democracy work is through struggle, through earnest struggle. The whole history of the progress of the human family has come through earnest struggle. The conflict must be exciting, agitating, and all-absorbing for the time being, putting all the tumults to silence. Frederick Douglass. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Men who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing the ground. They want the rain without thunder and lightning. They want the oceans without the awful roar of its mighty waters. Our struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. You find out what a people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of oppression and wrong that were imposed upon them, and these will continue until they're restricted by words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. So then, black people will be held at the north, hunted and flogged at the south, so long as they submit to these devilish outrages and make no resistance, either moral or physical. Men and women may not get all that they pay for in this world, but they sure as hell must pay for all that they get. Thank you.